Welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where we interview entertainment pros about their careers and how they became successful in the industry. The secrets to their success here every week. Here's your host, Sean Ventura.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ventura, and I just want to say subscribe on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you are, and tell your friends and share the episodes on social media. Okay, thanks. My guest today is Art David. He is a VFX supervisor. He has worked on The Matrix and Die Hard 3 and so many more films, and he's got a lot of stories, and he's a great guy. So here we go. All right, so lots to talk about here with Art David. We used to work together at Turner. Saw him in the hallways. I actually think I went to your office once and we had a conversation. I knew your son.
I think more than once.
We what?
I think more than once.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think I just came by to talk to you sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But so we'll just get started. And my first question, we're going to cover your entire career. But my first question is, how did you know you wanted to be in the TV industry and in effects?
Well, Sean, it's funny because I grew up at a time that was pretty pivotal for doing what I do. And it was no choice of my own or my parents either. I grew up when television was really starting to proliferate into the generation that was the end of the baby boom. And
right.
I would actually want to watch TV or go to movies more than anything as a kid. Even though I grew up on the beach in Jacksonville, Florida, and I had a great childhood outside and experiencing, real life, the storytelling just always really got me going. And my parents, it's funny, I had three brothers, and my parents used to say, look, you're the oldest. If you can go to your room, and we all slept in the same room, if you go to your room and when they fall asleep, you can come back out and watch Get Smart with us, or you can watch Gunsmoke or something like that.
Oh, cool.
And I would lay in my room, kind of polling my brothers every 5 minutes. Are you asleep yet? No. It's like, oh, well, go to sleep, and then the joke was always on me because I would fall asleep before them and I would be all mad when I got up the next morning. But I was part of the generation that grew up on television and storytelling, visual storytelling. So it was really kind of a natural fit. But I had to take a few twists and turns along the way before I understood it was my destiny.
Right. And was there, and this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but was there a movie like Jaws or something that you saw, or even Star Wars, where you're like, whoa, I want to do that? So
there were several movies that were typical that affected people my age. Most of them, it's funny, they don't stand up to the test of time. When I looked at them now, in my 20s, I would try to get my wife to watch this movie that I really liked, like Smokey and the Bandit. Mm-hmm. And when I watched it, it was like, oh, this is not that good. I remember it. And, but I remember going to see Jaws was one of them, but right. I was a high school senior when Star Wars came out.
Right.
And, when I went to Star Wars and saw Star Wars, it just totally flipped my mind over into not only great storytelling, which was great at the time, obviously it's advanced, but the visual effects, the way to tell a visual story, just grabbed me right then. But if it were a goal, it was so unobtainable, I had no way to get my mind around how to achieve it.
Right.
All I knew is that I liked it, and I would, at the time I was into photography, I was I'd gotten a camera in the 11th grade, and I would take my brothers out to the beach and I would shoot visual effects with them in stills.
Okay.
So if you can follow this, the first visual effect I ever did was I had a long lens and I went out on a moonlit night on the beach and I zoomed into the moon and put it on the left upper corner of the frame. Right. And I took a time exposure of the moon. And then I didn't advance the film. I put my brothers on the beach and I framed them on the lower right of it. And then I zoomed into them and I took a double exposure. And on that picture, it looks like my brothers are right next to a huge moon. And it was the first thing I ever did.
Cool.
as a child. And it was just solving those types of problems always really got me going. And it was something that I just loved doing ever since that time on.
Very cool. So you're a junior, you're messing around with the camera on the beach and doing some cool stuff in camera. When do you decide to go to college for effects or film or what is it?
Well, it's funny because as a 17, 18-year-old young adult, like all young adults even now, trying to figure out what you're going to do for a living is a cruel and arduous process.
Yes.
And my father was a physician. My mother worked as a nurse or as a emergency room tech. Most of my family was medical, and I hated blood, and I hated that side of things. And so in my young thinking at that time, the only way to be successful was to be a doctor or a lawyer. Since I hated blood, I must be a lawyer. This was my logic as a young high school student. So I thought that I would go to school to be a lawyer. And so I went to Florida State University from Jacksonville. And I quickly, actually not so quickly, I learned that if I'm not passionate about something, I will not do well in it. And when I went to my first accounting courses, my economic courses, I just had no mind for that, and I had no interest in it and no passion for it. But I kept going just to please my parents. And I've got a famous thing that I kept around, and I show it to people when I'm giving talks about my life, is that I was dismissed from Florida State University for academic reasons. I can see it at the bottom of the page.
Right, I saw that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it affected me so badly because it was my first failure, my first big failure. And so after having some discussions with my parents about it and having their input on the situation, I disagreed with that input. And so I basically went out on my own, and I went back to Tallahassee, and I started to search my soul for what it is that I love to do. At the time, I'd been working at the video center at Florida State, and I'd been running a camera in these bars and restaurants that were doing talent nights. And so it was just for fun. It was just a hobby. It was a thing that I liked doing. But it never occurred to me that this is what people do for a living, until the day that it occurred to me that people do this for a living. And I thought, man, I could be really, really happy doing this. And at the time, it was quite fortuitous because they were just starting up the film and television program at Florida State. And since I've been working at the video center, they basically said, you've got more experience than grade point average, but that's the reason why we're going to take you. So they readmitted me back to Florida State. And I just excelled in everything that I did there. I jumped out way ahead of my class. I ended up getting my first job at Florida Public Television, editing and directing documentaries.
Cool.
And shooting the legislature, basically. So during the legislative session, we would shoot committee meetings and inside the Capitol building. But when they were out of session, we would go around the state of Florida and shoot and edit documentaries. And so I ended up graduating with honors. And I got my first job right out of school in Miami, editing videotape, editing for commercials and for TV shows and stuff like that. And that was my entrance into that side of the business. The main side of the business was through editing.
Nice. Okay, so let's come back around to you're in Miami. You're at the first place. Where do you go from there?
So I've been editing, and this is in the 80s now. I got there in 83. I got married in 83 down in South Florida to my wife of 40 years, basically.
Wow.
And yeah, she's been great. One of the greatest things about her is that we met in Tallahassee, and when I was making my first demo reel, I said, why don't you come in with me? And we went in at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we walked out at 6 o'clock in the morning. And she said, where did the time go? I said, I want you to please remember that for the rest of our lives, because whenever I'm not home, that's what happened to me. The time just went away. And if you've ever studied flow and mental concentration to the degree that we have to in our business, it's easy for the hours just to slip away.
Yeah.
And she's been a pro at that. She's mentored other young wives in the business about it. But at any rate, we got to Florida. It was in the 80s in Miami, It was a very strange and wonderful time because things were brand new. The concept of editing on a computer was brand new. I edited on a computer called the CMX 340X, and it was a machine that would take a paper punch input for its edit decision list. It would save it on that as well. And so it was primitive by many stretches of the imagination, but the things we could do with it were pretty phenomenal at the time. And there was a lot of room for exploration and independent study. And that's basically what I did in my first job was I pushed myself in every way. And then the first chance at visual effects came in that job when a company called Waterbed City, who was a big client of the place where I worked, Channel 1, came in and said, we want to do a takeoff on Star Wars because The Empire Strikes Back just came out. And so they said, we want to take our hostess and make her look like she is at the end of Star Wars when Obi-Wan Kenobi is kind of transparent but glowing and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, how can I do that? And I figured out a way to do it, and I helped them shoot it. And that was my very first professional visual effect. And from that point forward, I was just hooked on doing more and more of that.
Okay, so explain that to me again. You were making her in outer space, or I didn't get that.
Right. So
it's like Star Wars, they said.
It's like Star Wars. So basically, they wanted her to be a hooded figure, basically shot from like the chest up.
Okay.
And so she's looking down, and you can't see her face. When she looks up and reveals her face, and you see it's Nancy, the person that people were used to seeing in the Waterbed City commercials.
Right.
The exterior of her was supposed to be glowing and sparkling a bit.
Okay.
And then there would be space behind her.
So you shot her on a green screen?
I did not.
No.
I shot her over black. And then what I did was I backed up the tape from where we shot her, and I traced her general outline on the monitor.
Okay.
With a grease pencil. Then I came back through it with a piece of tracing paper and rubbed it on the monitor and got that outline onto the tracing paper, which then I transferred to a piece of cardboard. And then I took the cardboard and I registered it to the outline on the monitor while it was on a camera. And then I put various things behind it that were lit, like tinfoil. I had a scrim that would do a glowy type of a light. And then I would take the camera and I would balloon the iris and I would rotate the star filter and I would just make all these elements that I could then composite her on top of and it around her. And it looked perfect. It was exactly what I wanted it to do. Nice. It didn't move with her. It wasn't rotoscoped or anything like that. It was just a general shape, but it had the effect. And we did it in an hour and a half in the studio. And it took me about a half a day on tape to composite it. And it was the beginning of the professional career.
Right. Do you feel like you're, it's very cool. Do you feel like you're a problem solver? Because I feel like as an editor, you're a problem solver. I'm sure visual effects is similar. It's like, I don't know how to do this, but I'll figure it out.
It is totally what we are. Anybody successful in this business loves solving problems and is not happy unless they're solving problems. Right. In the times in my career when I've been too comfortable, too happy, no problems to solve, right. I'm miserable, totally miserable. And when I learned that about myself, actually late in life, I came upon a saying that I really live by now. And it's like, most people are, when they're seeking happiness, happiness comes to me when I have a meaningful struggle. That's the way I define it. Okay. It's in the book.
I like that.
The subtle art of not giving up. I don't know what your audience is, but it's the subtle art of not giving a F-U-C-K. Right. And it's a great book because it basically taught me about myself that when I've been the happiest in my life, I've been up against the wall with something to deliver, no way to deliver it, odds are against us, and I'm with a great team that can move forward and come out with a great result. That is happiness for me. Always has been.
So where do we go from there? From the mattress outer space commercial?
So as I progressed through the Florida part of my career, I got tired of South Florida. The people I was working for, they didn't have the same goals that I did, and so I decided to move on. And that was the first time I worked at Turner. I moved up in 1984.
Okay.
And I always wanted to work at Turner. It was a groundbreaking place in the 80s. Of course, it invented cable television and news. And it was a great place to grow and develop at that time. Ted was still there. And it was like there was this aura of you can do anything and you can fail. You can actually go try something and fail. And that's okay as long as we learn.
Right.
And that to me was like just exactly the way I needed to grow and develop. And I started as an editor there, the same way that I left South Florida. But I worked my way through the ranks. I ended up directing, and then that's also how I got the nod to go to the 1986 Goodwill Games as an editor.
Right.
And that was working in the Soviet Union in the mid-'80s when it was a communist enemy country. It was 3 months after Chernobyl happened. Wow. So there was a nuclear disaster about 300 miles from where we were. And that experience was just the first big experience of many in terms of solving a large problem and being there with having to create your own solutions, to jump off a cliff and build your parachute on the way down. That's something that I recognized at that moment how much I loved that. And so there are many stories from the Goodwill Games, but I was asked to do the closing credit piece for the entire games. And so I just did an entire recap from opening ceremony to closing ceremony over some music. And editing to music was something that I just always loved. I have my own way of doing it. I have some rules that I follow that have been very successful that I teach people.
Right.
And I just basically operated that principle while I was editing that piece and another piece, a figure skating piece, that told the story of basically countries forgiving each other and we're all just people and we all need to live in the same world without pointing nuclear weapons at one another. And I just had a blast doing it. And I came home to a hero's welcome in Atlanta after 5 weeks in the Soviet Union, losing 25 pounds.
Wow.
Because there wasn't much to eat.
Right.
And I got sick in the middle of it. One of us, Marty Beeson, who you may know, had to spend.
I remember Marty, yeah.
Marty was an audio person. He had an appendicitis, had to spend an extra 2 weeks in the Soviet Union.
Wow.
When all we wanted to do was come home. But it was a great time to grow and develop there. And I ended up winning the first Emmy that Turner ever won. Since the Goodwill Games was a cable operation, it was not eligible for Emmy Awards until parts of the Goodwill Games were broadcast. They were sold to independent television stations and broadcast. So it was eligible. And so just quite on a whim, I just submitted these two pieces and went to New York totally unexpectedly. Because I, again, never thought I would win. And then they said, on Friday, you're going to New York on Monday, buy a suit, and you're sitting at a table with the rest of the Turner brass. I'm like, oh, my gosh. And again, a long story short, I came home on the airplane with a statue 24 hours later.
Right.
And it was a great experience. My first visual effect in a movie was on Die Hard 3. And so through another story that I'll tell you, basically I left the job that I was at. I bought my first visual effects computer and Silicon Graphics Indigo 2. I paid $64,000 for it. It has less power than the iPhone in your pocket right now. The first job I got was doing a shot in Die Hard 3 where he's taking off in a cab with Samuel L. Jackson. Yep. And he is going, what it looks like in story is he's going through this hole in traffic in an intersection. It looks exceedingly dangerous. They couldn't do it practically. So the way that they did it was they had the opposing traffic, the ones coming perpendicular to him, come through, and then the stunt driver, goes through that intersection with no opposing traffic after the first wave. They shot that as the A side of the shot. Then they shot only the opposing traffic after the first wave in the B side of the shot, and my job was to put it together to make it look like he's going through a hole in traffic. It's on YouTube. You can find it. And I can show it.
But explain it to me, because I saw the movie, and when you say a hole in traffic, do you mean like a hole opens up and it's almost like a time machine thing, or it's a big circle that you drive through that goes in, or are you saying a hole in the actual traffic to just find and get through?
A hole in the actual traffic to find and get through. That looks impossible. So in the story, Bruce Willis and
Samuel Jackson
and Bruce Willis have to get to the other side of New York in a unrealistic time.
Right.
They steal a cab, basically. They do a U-turn in the middle of the street, and when they do, they're facing an intersection in which they have a red light. So traffic is in full swing in the perpendicular direction on their green light, and he just blasts through the red light. But there happened to be a hole there in that traffic in the story that he gets through without hitting anything. So that was the problem to solve, was how to do that, and how to make it look dangerous.
What did you do on The Matrix? I saw some bullet thing.
Bullet time.
Was that the actual 360-degree bullet or something else?
Well, the whole story starts with me. Now I'm years into Wavelight. Wavelight started in '95 when I bought the SGI. This is now '99. And I was working on a job. I'd already done 4 movies at that point, two for Sony, one for another company called Synergy, which ended up being the company that The Matrix. But I ended up on a job that I hated, and it was Super Bowl Sunday, 1999. And I was working on this stupid job, and I was upstairs, and I was going to miss the Super Bowl. So I was really kind of mad, and I came downstairs and I thought, I'm going to watch some commercials, here at halftime while I eat dinner, and I'll go back up and keep working on this stupid job. So I told you before, if I'm not motivated, I have a really hard time. And every time I've done something just for money, it never works out. And this is one of those. So
right.
So I'm eating something I don't like, and I'm watching, these commercials on the Super Bowl, where the only commercial for The Matrix came on it was January the 15th, I believe, 1999. Yes, 1999. Mm-hmm. So I see this go on, and it actually has a portion of what would eventually be my shot, which is the rooftop shot where he bends over backwards and the bullets go by. And I say, I get disgusted. It's like, why don't I know who does these things? Why don't I have the network to support me, to get me on jobs like that, rather than this crappy job I'm on now? And I basically stormed back upstairs, and my family kind of, they're up against the wall as they watch me go by and fuming. And that was obviously Super Bowl Sunday, which is meaningful because I know the next Monday is when I'm finishing the crappy job and the phone rings. And it's a friend of mine I worked on the movie Contact with. And he said, "Hey, Art, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm working on a crappy job. What are you doing, Mike?" And he says, "I'm working on this thing called The Matrix, and we've got a problem with a part of it that we need your help with." And I said, "Well, that's awesome." And he said, he goes, "All right, well, the executive producer is going to call you, so just kind of hang tight." And so I hung tight for 2 weeks, and I'm just staring at the phone like a middle school girl before prom, and it's like I want this so bad. And so finally the phone rings, and the producer says, "All right, we figured out all this cool stuff with how to make this shot one of the most iconic in film history, but we're having trouble getting the first cameras to match the next cameras." In other words, the way the shot was done, it started with a film motion picture camera, and then it transitions over to several still cameras that were then on an array. It's a camera array. It's very famous the way they did the shot.
I remember seeing that. It's almost like a 360-degree camera array. Exactly.
And so they said, "We hear you're pretty good with 2D stuff, 2D morphing and rotoscoping." I said, "Yes." And they said, "All right, well, we'll send you some stuff and we'll send you a contract and look at the stuff and tell us what you think. So, of course, that took another 3 days before I got it in those days. And so I got it and I watched it on VHS tape and I thought, oh, man, yeah, I can do this. And so they called back and they said, all right, here's the problem. Budget-wise, we're at the end of our budget. We don't have the money we'd like to pay you. What would it cost? And I said, well, normally, a week of my time at that time is $10,000. I said, I tell you what, if you can guarantee me a credit, I'll do it for half price. And they said, you're kidding. I said, no, I mean it. They said, well, you're on then. They thought they got the deal of a lifetime. In the end, I worked on the shot for about a week and a half, and finally got it to exactly where they needed it. And I delivered it on Valentine's Day, 1999. And then I had no idea what The Matrix was about. I had no idea what the story was. I just knew what was in that one commercial. And I'd never seen a cut. I didn't know anything else about it. And so I got to go to the theater like you did when you went to go see it. And the rest is pretty much history. And
oh, man, it's so cool. It's like that's one of the most iconic shots in cinema history. I remember watching it. And it was like a Star Wars feeling. Like, how did they do this? Like, what is this? How did they get the camera to go around him and the bullet, to see the bullet and the whole thing, and the air was moving and bending. It was just like, wow.
If you see the part that I did, it's in the very beginning of the shot, and from behind him is when they shoot at him, and then you start to move around camera right, and so the shot that shows his hand move, his upper right hand moving, and the coat flowing, all of that had to be morphed into the first 3 still cameras. And so to track all of those like folds and bends that kept moving in the coat and things like that was maddening.
Oh, yeah.
But yet, man, I didn't stop for 3 days. I don't think I slept for 3 days while I was working on it.
Do you have wrist problems? Because I know my friend Mark, who I'm talking to tomorrow, he works for Showtime, but he did the MTV Movie Awards, and he rotoscoped for, I think, a couple weeks straight every day, and he even ended up switching hands, and both of his hands were like messed up.
I would switch between a mouse and a trackball and a whack-a-mole hand. So I never really had carpal tunnel. I would have my head and neck and spine will stay in the same place for over 5 hours. And then when I move for the first time, it's like I'm in traction. But yeah, so now I've got my credit is in The Matrix right when the Marilyn Manson song starts, and I'm on the Bullet Time crew. They couldn't call me a compositor because I wasn't part of the composite union at the time. And so they called me a 2D animator, which is kind of descriptive of what I did at the time. But to this day, again, I'll be in a bar or in a restaurant and I'll see that movie on the screen and knowing that my name goes by at the end. Except on TV, they squish it down so you can't see anybody's name. But so fast.
Right, and it goes by so fast. But that's very, very cool. So where do you go from there, Art? You go to, is this going to Judge Dredd? Because it looks like on Judge Dredd you were doing little sets too.
So Judge Dredd actually came right after Die Hard 3. It was the second movie that I did. But all that work in Massachusetts were the same people that ended up doing The Matrix. So when it came time, it was the networking lesson that I teach young people, is that networking is so much more important than anything else that you do. Because if I did not have the network behind me of people that knew me and liked me, I would have never gotten a shot at The Matrix. I would have never gotten 80% of the stuff that I did in my career. But the two things that I teach people is that, first of all, be nice to be around, solve people's problems, and they'll come back to you. And then the second thing is to meet people, get out and know people, seek out people that do what you want to do, and sit at their feet at all costs to learn what they do and to help solve their problems and to be there when they need someone. That has always been the cornerstone of what I do to this day. I'm 62 years old, and the job that I did this past February was exactly a product of those two things. I was nice to work with, and I knew enough people to get the job. It had very little to do with how good I was at what I did. But you do have to be good at what you do.
Yeah, you do, but it doesn't matter how talented you are if you're not fun to work with.
Exactly.
People avoid
and,
you.
and if you just
So where do you go after the Matrix?
so I said, I've done this lone wolf entrepreneurial thing now for 10 years. What's going on up there now that maybe I could lend myself to? And my friend, who is now senior vice president of Turner Studios, said, "Why don't you come up here and be our vice president of visual effects?" And I said, "Sounds great." And so I moved the family after 16 years, and I have 4 children from Orlando, Florida, up to Atlanta, Georgia. And I started working at Turner in an executive management role for the first time in my life. So again, pressing myself into things that I didn't know, that I thought I had the aptitude to learn, and that I'm never really happy with being one place for very long doing the same thing. And that was a great part of my growth in learning executive management.
Right. And you guys did really cool stuff at Turner Effects.
I'll start with Ted stories. Ted was such an amazing individual to be around, just because of the energy, the staring into the impossible. He was not a saint by any stretch of the imagination. And at the time, his time was valued at about $18,000 a second. This is back now. I'm backing up to the middle 80s. And we used to do these things called TED alerts, because Ted would come down into the studio and he'd sign on a new cable system in like Louisiana. And he, of course, knew the guy that was the head of the company. So he wanted to do a video kind of a welcome. And so since he owned a studio, he would just walk downstairs and expect whatever we were doing, because we were working on basketball and wrestling and promos and all the stuff, the business of the actual station. We had to stop doing what we were doing and do what Ted wanted to do. And so a typical TED alert would be, we would get a phone call from his secretary, his assistant, and we would have about 10 minutes to stop doing what we were doing and to go and pre-light the stage for him to just walk in and put the microphone on and point him towards the camera, and he would start talking. We had to be rolling when he walked in, because there wasn't any, ready, Mr. Turner? Okay, great. Okay, roll and action. No, he would just start talking, and when he was done, he would take the microphone off of his tie, and he would just throw it down on the ground and walk away. And if we didn't get it, there was nobody who was going to go, Mr. Turner, could you do that again?
But if you can go to, you just worked on a new show called Council of Dads for NBC. What was that like?
Oh, it was awesome. I've done, it's the second job I did for a company called Crafty Apes, a visual effects company in town. And what I've evolved to in my career now is something that's perfect for me. It's on-set supervision. So what I do is I supervise visual effects on the set, which is in the beginning of the process, which hopefully is before when the mistakes are made. So I will advise a director, producer, cinematographer, director of photography, how to shoot something, the best way to capture something, the things to consider with how to get their story told. And so it was so funny, because the way things happen in this business is that I got a call from Crafty Apes. It was on a Sunday. And I thought they were calling me about the job that I just finished with them. But they said, no, we've got something new to talk about. We've got this show called Council of Dads. It's shooting in Savannah. We need some help on the set there. Do you think you can do it? I said, sure. When does it start? They said, well, tomorrow. And I said, oh, okay. And so, there's the first problem to solve, is how to get there. Driving 5.5 hours, finding a place to stay, meeting everybody for the first time. And this could go well, or it could go badly. One of the things that I've never had anything better than is being on a set with a great crew. That is, I tell my kids and I tell people that I mentor, if you go into a set and you're there for the first day, you see people like hugging each other when they show up, because they've been in wars together, and they know that this person that just showed up is going to be a reliable partner. And it's such a emotional thing that when it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad too.
Yep.
But
Oh yeah.
but I went and I just started introducing myself. It's a whole thing that I go through. I'm so used to being the new guy and the guy that joins things late, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get kind of uptight about it and stressed about it, but it really everybody wants the help. They need the help, and so. I showed up in Savannah, and it's not a particularly effects-heavy show, but the storytelling in it is awesome.
Right.
I could not be happier with, number one, being a part of a project that had a great story and message, but number two is that they let me in on their storytelling. Mm-hmm. They would come, once they started to realize how I worked, they would actually let me talk to them about how they were shooting something. What would be the best angle for this? And what if we shot it like this, could you put this in easily? It's like, yes. And by the way, not only can you put it in easily, but if you did this, just, this really small thing, you would get this much back for that small thing. They loved the relationship, and so did I. And there was one of my favorite episodes, one of my favorite events that happened while we were working on it was, we were shooting around this large house. If you watch the show, there's a house that's in Savannah. That's this great mansion. It's very big chill-like, but it's a great house. And we were shooting in the middle of a rainstorm, and then all of a sudden we had to shelter inside the house for about 3 hours. So you've got about 150 very productive people that are now sheltered inside this house. Well, the actors and one of the writers, they all got on the piano there, and then we had this amazing sing-along party with no alcohol, with no real, kind of party, normal stuff. But it was just this great event that happened, and I suddenly realized that who gets to do this? Who gets to, stop? First of all, be in danger like we were, and then get sheltered inside of a house, and then having these amazing entertainment people. Like just sing. We all sang along. It was a great thing. So I thoroughly enjoyed that job, and I hope people watch it. It's I don't know when this is going to release, but on the 30th, which is I believe next Friday, will be the second show. The pilot's available on YouTube, and it's just a great experience. I hope people enjoy it. So I've had lots of experiences with younger people now, and I love it. I actually love mentoring. I thought about actually teaching. In a college scenario, but to me, I like the one-on-one type of experience. So I'll tell you a couple of questions I've got from younger people wanting to get into the business. And one is, when I worked for Turner, there was a young man at a college that I spoke at. It was a large auditorium, and he said, "I've had my resume in at Turner for the last 9 months. I keep calling, and HR won't talk to me. It seems like an impenetrable place that I can't get into. And I am just waiting for a chance to work for Turner." And when I heard that, I contrasted that to the way that I got into the business. And I basically said, look, if you are waiting in a line, you are wasting time. You need to be doing something, even if you're doing it at a lower level than you were aiming at. It's a false goal to aim at the top and think that you're going to get in just because of something that you say or something that you write. It's like, if you don't have a way in, a special way in, then go to a smaller place. Don't start right with Turner Studios. Go to a smaller web production place, and they're going to need something, and you're going to be able to learn and grow there. Lower your sights a bit and work up, rather than aiming for the top and then getting disgruntled or bitter because you haven't gotten any love. So don't wait in lines. That's a waste of time. Spend more time doing stuff than thinking about stuff. I've noticed that with younger people that can have all this access to YouTube and watch stories about the people that do what they want to do, which is awesome, it somehow turns into only watching and not doing. And I see this in some people that I'm actually very close to. And so my advice is to get a camera. download a free piece of software for editing or 3D animating or composite. Start doing stuff. The more you do, the better off you are. And even if you have to do it just for yourself or for some people that have projects, do. After you've started to learn, start to do as quickly as possible. And there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, and he basically talks about how people who are good at what they do put time into it, and they actually were doing it. Tiger Woods was a great golf player because he put 10,000 hours of playing golf into it before he was a championship winner. I believe I put 10,000 hours into production and media before I was actually any good at it. So nothing replaces doing.
Yeah.
And just get out there and do it. And don't let anybody get in your way of doing it. Think of different ways to do the same things that you want to do and get it done.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have my friend Bob Jergens, the comedian, in episode 2 of the podcast was talking about 10,000 hour rule. I've heard that a lot. But also there's no excuse today with younger people or people who want to switch careers with social media and LinkedIn. You could do a demo and put it on LinkedIn of 3D or shooting something, or you could put it on YouTube, or you could put it on Instagram or whatever, Facebook, and people will see it and they'll be like, oh, wow, this guy's really good. But you have to get good at it first, right? You can't just throw something up that you learned on your first day. So there's a lot of ways to reach people now that you just couldn't 20, 30 years ago. And I think that's great advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. It's been fun.
Thank you, man. That's great. Yeah, me too. That's awesome. You have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where entertainment pros talk about how they made their dream into a career.
Subscribe to our YouTube page, like and share our Facebook page, and download at Apple and Google Podcasts. Thanks to Bob Jergens for the Rockin' VO and Joseph McDade for the music. Next week's guest is awesome. It is Pat Rosano. He is a 3D compositor, After Effects guy, all around good guy. It's going to be fun. Check it out.